Hey guys, today we'll be talking about the Ponziani Opening Trap, and this opening trap starts off with the moves e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and here we're going to play the move pawn to c3. The whole idea of this move is simple. We prepare the move pawn to d4 on the next move, and our pawn on c3 will be supporting our center pawn. So black has three options in this position. He can play knight to f6, which is the main line. He can play bishop to c5 or pawn to d5. So let's first take a look at what if black plays the move bishop to c5. This is actually not a good move for black because he doesn't really prevent our pawn push to d4. We can still push our pawn to d4 because our pawn is supported by our pawn, by our knight, and by our queen. So after captures, black cannot capture our pawn, otherwise he would just lose a piece. And since our d4 pawn is now attacking his bishop on c5, his bishop is forced to move. So essentially, he wasted one move by playing his bishop twice. And after a move like bishop b4 check, we can block with our bishop or we can block with our knight as well. And here, white has quite a nice position with both the center pawns, and our pieces will be able to be developed really easily. And as you guys can see, the computer evaluation on the side shows that white is already up almost +1. Alright, now let's talk about the main line, which is knight to f6. Here we play pawn to d4, and black has three options in this position. He can capture our pawn on e4, he can capture our pawn on d4, or he can play a more passive move with pawn to d6, protecting his e5 pawn. So let's first take a look at the most popular line, which is knight takes e4. Here, we start off the trap by pushing our pawn forward and playing pawn to d5. So instead of capturing the pawn on e5 with either our pawn or our knight, we do not do so and push our pawn forward. The whole idea is our pawn attacks the knight on c6, and this knight actually does not have many squares to go, because if he plays a move like knight to a5, we can just push up our pawn to b4, and the knight is already trapped with no moves. And if he retreats the knight backwards to b8, this would not make any sense because he would just be undeveloping his knight. So the only good square for the knight to go is to play knight to e7. Now we capture the pawn on e5, and we have quite a funny situation with these three knights all along the e file. And if you guys take a look at black's position, it's actually not easy for black to develop his pieces. This is because both his bishops are blocked at the moment and they can't be developed, and a very natural move for black to play in this position would be pawn to d6, attacking the knight and freeing up his bishop. However, this is a horrible blunder for black because now we play the move bishop to b5 check. Black cannot block with the bishop because we would just capture, and our knight and our bishop is attacking that square. So he has to block the check with pawn to c6. Now we just capture the pawn, and black has many options here. He can capture our knight on e5, but after pawn takes pawn, giving discover check, black has to block with the bishop, and we just capture the bishop. Queen takes, and we capture the rook, promote it to a queen, and just after 11 moves, we already have 2 queens on the board, and it's an easy win for white. So black can't capture our knight on e5. Now let's take a look at what if he captures the pawn on c6 with his knight. If knight takes c6, we just capture back with our knight, and after pawn takes, we play bishop takes c6, check, hitting the rook and hitting the knight as well for this nice triple attack. So black can't capture with the knight, and he has to capture back with this pawn. So after pawn takes, knight takes, and if knight takes, we just reach the same position with the triple attack with our bishop. So he can't capture our knight, and black here has a really sneaky move with queen to b6. The queen attacks our bishop, attacks our knight, but most importantly, black is actually threatening to capture on f2 to give checkmate in 1, because his knight on e4 also attacks the f2 square. However, don't worry and don't panic because we have this nice move with knight to d4. The knight blocks the queen's diagonal, the knight protects the bishop on b5, and by moving the knight away, we give another discovered check on the king. So here, black has to play either king to d8 or blocking with the bishop, in which we just capture, and after captures, we can just castle, and even though we are only up one pawn in this position, the black's king is quite exposed in the center and he can't castle anymore. So all we have to do is just develop our pieces normally, and later on we have moves like rook to e1, controlling this diagonal, and also queen to g4 check. And as you guys can see, the computer evaluates this position as +4, even though we are only up a pawn, so this is a completely winning position for white. Now let's go back and see what if black played the same move, queen to b6, with the same idea in this position instead, so without capturing the pawn on c6. Now, the queen on b6 has the same ideas, attacks our bishop, and also threatens to give checkmate in 1 on f2. The difference in this position is we no longer have the knight move from c6, dropping back to d4 because our knight is still here on e5. But don't worry because in this position, we have an even stronger move. Pause the video for a bit if you'd like to find the best move for white in this position. The best move now is to play pawn takes pawn, giving discovered check. Of course, black can capture our bishop, but that would just move the queen away from the diagonal on f2, and since there's no checkmating threats for black right now in this position, we can just capture the rook and promote it into a queen, and just after 10 moves, it's completely winning as we have 2 queens on the board. So black can't capture our bishop on b5, and he has to move his king because blocking with the bishop would mean that we just capture it with our bishop or our knight. So king, he has to play king to d8, and here we play knight takes f7 check, forcing the king to go to king to c7, which is the only legal move. And now we have a really nice brilliant move with pawn captures rook, but instead of promoting it to a queen, we under promote it to a knight, and the knight gives check and attacks the queen at the same time. So after the king moves, we can just capture the queen, and it's an easy win for white as we are just one queen up again. But before we continue with the other variations, if you're enjoying the content so far, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us create more amazing chess videos for you. So we have just discussed the variation where black played the move pawn to d6, allowing us to play bishop to b5 check. And as I mentioned earlier, there's actually not many moves that black can play in this position, since his pieces are still not developed yet. So the best move for black here is to play the move knight to g6, offering a trade of knights and freeing up his bishop. Now in this position, instead of trading knights or dropping back our own knight, we actually have another nice trap, which is to play the move bishop to d3. Of course, if black captures our knight, we just capture back his knight on e4 and life just goes on. But however, the whole idea of playing bishop to d3 is that we actually want to invite black to capture our pawn on f2. This is because since the knight is going to be captured anyway, black might think that why not he captures our pawn first on f2, attacking our rook and our queen, so that after we capture back with the king, black captures our knight on e5, and now black is one pawn up and our king is unable to castle. And black would be having a better position. And yes, he would be right, except for the fact that we do not have to capture the knight on f2. Instead, we have an even stronger move with bishop takes g6, sacrificing our own queen. Now, of course, black can capture our bishop on g6, in which we just capture the knight, and we have already gained one piece for just a pawn, and it would be an easy win for us. So let's take a look at the variation. What if black captures our queen? Now, we capture the pawn on f7 with check. The king is forced to move up because our knight protects our bishop. So after king e7, we bring up our other bishop, bishop to g5 check. The king has only one legal move, which is to go to d6. We give another check with the knight, knight to c4. Again, the king has only one legal move to c5 because the pawn is defended by the bishop. The knight covers this square, the bishop covers this square, and the pawn covers these two squares. So the only move for black is to play the king up, king to c5. Now, of course, you can capture the black queen on d8, and this would be also a completely winning position for white. However, we have an even stronger move with knight b to a3. The whole idea of this move is that the knight on a3 protects this knight on c4, and it also covers the square on b5, which creates a checkmating net for the enemy king. Because if black were to play a move like queen captures bishop, pawn to b4 would be checkmate already. So black can't capture our bishop, and if he tries to sacrifice his knight for this b2 pawn over here, preventing us from checkmating him, now we play the move bishop to e3 instead, checkmating the king. Because the knight, which was previously on d1, no longer controls the square on e3. And if black were to play a move like pawn to a5, trying to prevent our pawn push to b4, now we just capture the queen on d8, and we are completely winning in this position with a whole piece up, and the knight on d1 is actually trapped because he has no moves to go. And we would soon be 2 pieces up and an easy win for white, as the black's king is still stuck out in the open, which might be checkmated soon. Alright, so let's go back to this position, and we have discussed the key lines with knight takes e4 and the traps in those variations. So now we need to discuss what if black captures our pawn on d4. After captures, we just play push our pawn up, pawn to e5, attacking the knight. The black's knight will probably jump to d5, and we just play queen to b3, developing our queen and attacking the knight at the same time. The knight probably has to drop back to b6, and we just recapture the pawn on d4 now. Unfortunately, there are no traps in this variation, but white's position looks really nice because we have a strong center pawn. Our pieces are free to develop compared to black's pieces, where this bishop is still stuck, unable to develop, and we are also threatening to play pawn to d5, attacking the knight on the next move. The third option that black can play in this position is the more passive pawn to d6, protecting his center e5 pawn. Here, we just push up our pawn forward, pawn to d5, the knight probably has to drop back to e7, because if he plays knight to a5, again, pawn to b4 is trapping the knight, and there's no reason for black to retreat the knight to b8. So after knight to e7, we play the move bishop to g5, attacking the knight on f6, and inviting black to capture our pawn on e4, because after captures, we have the third trap, which is queen to a4 check, hitting the king, and double attack, hitting the knight at the same time. And after black blocks the check, we just capture the knight, and it's an easy 1 piece up for us. Now, of course, black is not forced to capture the pawn on e4. He can play a move like knight to g6, in which we just continue our development and play normal chess, like with moves like knight to d2, bishop e2, bishop d3, and castle. One thing to note that if let's say we play some waiting moves, let's say pawn to h3, black still cannot capture our pawn on e4 because now the queen is pinned, and even if black plays a move like bishop here to e7, unpinning the knight, black will still be unable to capture our pawn on e4 because queen to a4 check always has the double attack on the king and winning the knight on e4. Alright, so we have discussed what if black played bishop c5 and the main line knight to f6. Now, we need to talk about the best engine move in this position for black is to play pawn to d5, in which we can no longer push up our pawn to d4 because our pawn on e4 is under attack and black strikes first at the center. So here the best move would be queen to a4, trying to utilize the pin and threatening to capture the e5 pawn on the next move. Our queen on a4 also protects our pawn on e4. Don't worry about this best engine line variation because if your opponent has not seen the Ponziani opening before, it is almost guaranteed that they would fall into one of the traps as shown above, and unless they have studied this position and prepared this line with the engine, they would definitely have no knowledge of this best engine move. Now, black has a few options here. He can play bishop d7, and the next best engine moves goes something like this. And instead of bishop to d7, black can also play pawn to f6, protecting the e5 pawn, and life just goes on with normal development. Again, don't worry, because by no means white is losing or worse in this position if your opponent plays the best engine line. You just have to play normally and develop your pieces, and it would just be a normal game of chess. And as I mentioned earlier, as long as your opponent haven't seen this opening trap before, it is almost guaranteed that they would fall into one of the traps that we discussed earlier. And that wraps up our video on the Ponziani Opening Trap, a trap that even Grandmasters fall for, and we've explored the key moves and tactics involved in this deceptive opening. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more chess content. In the comments below, let us know which trap did you enjoy the most and why. Thanks for watching, and we see you in the next video.